The village of Dalton is more than $3.5 million in the hole. Mayor Tiffany Henyard is accused of misusing money, and today, she's nowhere to be found.
Very, very diligently, very hard under difficult circumstances to get as much information as we could to share with you.
She thinks she's going to jail. I'm also a former Cook County Sheriff for the Department of Corrections, and I suggest that she go and take a tour of that facility.
Corruption within positions of authority is an issue that plagues communities nationwide. But Mayor Tiffany Henyard seems to have raised the stakes in a way few can match. Over the years, Henyard has perfected the art of evading accountability, using every tactic available to remain untouchable. However, as the media and law enforcement have increasingly focused on her activities, Henyard now finds herself facing the consequences of a long history of questionable actions. The walls are closing in on her, and it seems that nothing is going in her favor. Henyard's rise to power was anything but conventional. It began in the wake of the death of longtime Mayor Frank Zuccarelli, with the Board of Trustees tasked with selecting a successor. According to state election law, the board had just 60 days to make this critical decision. Several candidates emerged, including Joyce Washington, a trustee with years of service and a former interim supervisor, and Jerry Jones, a trustee who also served as the Thornton Township assessor. These two were the frontrunners, yet the Board of Trustees could not come to a consensus, and the process became drawn out, with the deadline rapidly approaching. With time running out, Henyard, who had earlier applied for the position, was nominated as a last-minute candidate. Trustee Christopher Gonzalez, recognizing that a decision was imminent, moved to nominate Henyard, and the vote passed, putting her in office just before midnight. Notably, Henyard had not been a part of the initial round of nominations, which should have raised red flags. Initially, the trustees had focused on other candidates, but in a last-ditch effort to resolve the deadlock and avoid a public vote, Gonzalez threw his support behind Henyard. His gamble worked, and Henyard was soon sworn in as the new mayor of Dalton. At first, Henyard's public appearance seemed promising. In her initial address to the Board of Trustees, she expressed gratitude for her appointment and promised to work diligently and responsibly for the people of Thornton Township. I pledge to the residents of Thornton Township, the elected officials, the Board of Trustees, and the entire staff that we will work hard and have an honest and responsible fiscal year, she said, positioning herself as a servant of the people. For a brief moment, it seemed as though things were headed in the right direction. Her rhetoric focused on transparency, collaboration, and public service, and her leadership style appeared competent. However, it didn't take long for things to take a dark turn. Behind the scenes, rumors began to circulate that Henyard harbored personal grudges against certain individuals close to the late Mayor Zuccarelli, particularly those who had worked alongside him during his tenure. Sources claimed that Henyard, insecure and unable to accept help from those with long-standing ties to the mayor's office, felt threatened by their influence. This suspicion soon manifested in her decision-making, which appeared to be more driven by personal insecurities than any genuine interest in serving the public. Her first significant action as mayor was the abrupt dismissal of key employees, starting with Jessica Jones. The decision was made without any explanation or prior warning, leaving many in the community shocked and questioning the rationale behind the move. The vote to remove Jones was swift and unanimous, even from those who had initially supported Henyard. The very same day, Henyard fired another employee, Stephanie Weidman, in an equally abrupt manner. However, this vote was more contentious, with a 4-to-1 split, and trustee Christopher Gonzalez cast the only dissenting vote. These terminations raised serious questions. Why were 2 longtime employees fired without any explanation? What led Henyard to make such sweeping decisions without offering any clarity or justification to either the staff or the public? The employees themselves were blindsided by the decision. One of them, still reeling from the firing, reached out to Jerry Jones, expressing disbelief. "I'm so sorry they let you go. It came out of left field. It hurts. I haven't been told why. I've reached out and am waiting for a meeting to figure out what went wrong." Despite this, neither the Board of Trustees nor the public demanded any further explanation from Henyard. These controversial actions revealed the first cracks in Henyard's leadership. What had initially seemed like an effective, competent, and optimistic leadership style quickly gave way to one characterized by personal grudges, secrecy, and authoritarianism. Henyard's actions were not driven by a desire to improve the township, but rather by a desire to eliminate those she felt threatened by. This became clear when it was discovered that Henyard had not been appointed based on her qualifications, experience, or even merit, but rather as a political maneuver designed to avoid a public vote. With this revelation, it became apparent that Henyard's leadership style was far from collaborative. Rather than working with experienced figures and valuing the input of others, she alienated key individuals and removed them from office without offering any rational explanations. The fallout from these dismissals was just the beginning of Henyard's tumultuous time in office. The board, initially hopeful that a quick resolution to the leadership vacuum would restore stability, now found themselves dealing with a hostile and unpredictable mayor. Henyard's refusal to collaborate or explain her actions only deepened the divide, and public confidence in her leadership began to crumble. Her public pledges of fiscal responsibility and service were quickly contradicted by her erratic decisions and lack of transparency. The residents of Thornton Township began to question whether Henyard had their best interests at heart, especially when her actions consistently appeared to prioritize her personal insecurities over the well-being of the community. By dismissing experienced staff members and antagonizing longtime political figures, Henyard not only jeopardized her ability to lead, but also created a toxic environment ripe for further controversy. Her swift rise to power, once seen as a potential fresh start for the township, now seemed to be overshadowed by the consequences of her actions. Every move she made seemed to distance her from those she was supposed to be serving, and it was clear that her leadership style was less about serving the people and more about consolidating power. As investigations into Henyard's behavior and decisions have continued, it is uncertain how long she can maintain her position. With each passing day, the political fallout from her actions only grows more significant, and the community's trust in her leadership appears irreparably broken. The legal challenges, fueled by mounting public pressure, suggest that Henyard's ability to maintain her political standing is dwindling fast. The residents of Thornton Township, once hopeful for a change in leadership, now find themselves questioning whether Henyard can continue to lead, or whether her time in office is rapidly drawing to a close. As Henyard faces mounting legal scrutiny and public backlash, the future of Thornton Township hangs in the balance. If the ongoing investigations continue to uncover more of Henyard's questionable actions and financial misconduct, she may soon find herself facing a reckoning she can no longer avoid. The impact of her tenure, marked by secrecy, insecurity, and questionable decision-making, will likely be felt for years to come, regardless of the outcome of her current challenges. If the walls continue to close in on Henyard, it seems increasingly likely that her political career will come to an abrupt and unsavory end, leaving Thornton Township to pick up the pieces after a period of turmoil.
Of Supervisor Henyard's promise of come to the good things, there's so much good going on that we want to tell you about. When we show up to report on it, we were denied access.
So that's what happened to our reporter, and then at the next meeting that you attended.
Tiffany Henyard's leadership in Thornton Township has sparked growing controversy, with her actions in office increasingly drawing public scrutiny and criticism. From her decisions to her increasingly strained attempts to justify those decisions, Henyard's administration has been marked by defensiveness, secrecy, and a lack of accountability. As the pressure mounts, it appears that Henyard is more concerned with protecting her image and maintaining control than addressing the genuine concerns of the community she was meant to serve. One of Henyard's more contentious moves was the sudden and unexplained relocation of office spaces within the township. Henyard defended the move by stating that it was necessary due to heat issues affecting the work environment. In her statement, she dismissed objections from Assessor Elston and implied that the concerns were exaggerated and not important. According to Henyard, the office rearrangement was part of a broader initiative to improve citizen services, and she framed it as a well-thought-out strategy. However, critics were quick to point out that Henyard had not provided any official documentation or clear rationale for the move, which left residents questioning whether it was truly motivated by efficiency or if there was another underlying agenda. The lack of transparency surrounding the relocation only fueled suspicions among residents, who began to wonder if the move was a convenient excuse to mask ulterior motives or internal power struggles within the township. Many questioned the real reason for the office shuffle, especially considering that no formal announcement had been made and no clear explanation had been provided. This marked the beginning of a pattern of behavior where Henyard seemed to avoid offering substantive explanations for her actions, leading to even greater public discontent. As Henyard's attempts to justify her decisions grew more strained, even some of her previous supporters began to question her leadership. One of her allies, attempting to defend Henyard, admitted that the mayor had never consulted them on any significant decisions regarding the township. This admission, while meant to deflect some of the criticism, instead only deepened the concerns surrounding Henyard's leadership style. Her failure to engage in open communication with those close to her revealed a worrying disregard for collaboration and transparency, and the public became increasingly uncertain about her ability to lead effectively. In an effort to redirect attention away from the growing controversy, one of Henyard's supporters suggested that the local media should focus less on negative investigations and instead highlight the township's receipt of the Government Finance Officers Association's GFOA, Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. While this suggestion was meant to shift the narrative toward the administration's financial accomplishments, it was seen by many residents as an empty attempt to distract from the real issues at hand. The public, already dissatisfied with Henyard's leadership, saw this as a superficial diversion rather than a genuine effort to address the deeper concerns surrounding her actions. Amid mounting criticism, Henyard's responses became increasingly unusual, characterized by defensive posturing and spiritual overtones. Instead of addressing the legitimate concerns raised by residents and the media, Henyard and her supporters began framing the situation as part of a larger spiritual battle. Her close ally, Keith Freeman, took to publicly shaming the media for what he described as its obsession with negative stories about the township. Freeman argued that the media's focus on what he called petty gossip and kid stuff was distracting from the township's financial achievements, which he believed should be celebrated. Freeman's rhetoric only added to the growing sense of defensiveness within Henyard's administration. He insisted that the media was unfairly focusing on trivial issues and implied that critics of Henyard's leadership were either misinformed or maliciously attacking the administration without valid reasons. To bolster his claims, Freeman even provided photo documentation to show that no files or sensitive materials had been mishandled during the office relocation. Yet, despite his efforts to quell concerns, the public remained unconvinced, and the real issues, lack of transparency, poor decision-making, and public dissatisfaction, remained unresolved. In a more dramatic turn, Freeman began to frame Henyard's leadership in spiritual terms, suggesting that her appointment as mayor was the result of divine intervention. According to Freeman, Henyard was the right person for the job, and the challenges she faced were part of a larger divine plan. This rhetoric portrayed Henyard as a martyr enduring hardship with strength and virtue, positioning her as a righteous figure fighting against unjust attacks. However, many residents saw this as a clear attempt to deflect attention from the growing concerns about Henyard's administration. Instead of directly addressing her leadership shortcomings, Henyard's team was positioning her as a virtuous figure whose struggles were part of a larger spiritual mission. This shift in tone signaled a major change in Henyard's public relations strategy. As public pressure continued to mount, Henyard began limiting media access and hosting private meetings to better control the narrative surrounding her leadership. When reporters were eventually allowed into some of these meetings, they quickly noticed a troubling pattern. Henyard would abruptly end sessions as soon as the media arrived, giving the impression that she was intentionally avoiding accountability and unwilling to answer tough questions. This only deepened public speculation about her leadership and reinforced the perception that she was more focused on controlling her image than addressing the real issues facing the community. Meanwhile, tensions within the township office remained high. Freeman continued to publicly defend Henyard, dismissing criticism as mere mess and gossip, and refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. He even implied that critics were either misinformed or maliciously attacking the administration without justification. Despite his claims, residents and media outlets continued to highlight the lack of transparency, questionable decision-making, and growing discontent surrounding Henyard's administration. Instead of addressing these issues directly, Henyard's administration seemed more focused on defending her image and avoiding accountability. The growing reliance on spiritual rhetoric, defensive posturing, and media manipulation only deepened the divide between Henyard and the community. While some of her loyal supporters embraced the narrative of Henyard as a righteous leader fighting against unfair criticism, the majority of residents began to see through the facade. Henyard's leadership was no longer defined by her ability to serve the community effectively, but by her efforts to protect her reputation and deflect attention from her failures. As public trust in Henyard's administration continued to erode, her credibility began to falter. Rather than responding to valid concerns with transparency and decisive action, Henyard's administration became more secretive and defensive. Her refusal to answer questions, provide clear explanations, or take responsibility for her actions left many residents feeling abandoned and disillusioned. The township's decision to relocate offices, which Henyard had claimed was part of a larger plan to improve services, became one of the most glaring examples of her failure to lead effectively. The lack of transparency surrounding the move, combined with Henyard's dismissive attitude toward objections, led many to believe that her actions were motivated by something other than efficiency, perhaps personal interests or internal power struggles. Ultimately, Henyard's attempts to deflect blame and position herself as a martyr failed to quell the mounting discontent surrounding her administration. Instead of focusing on restoring public trust through transparent communication, accountability, and decisive action, she seemed more interested in maintaining control over her image. Her reliance on spiritual rhetoric, defensive tactics, and limiting public access only deepened the rift between her and the residents she was supposed to serve. As public dissatisfaction with Henyard's leadership reached a boiling point, it became clear that her administration was at a crossroads. Rather than addressing the real challenges facing the township, Henyard seemed more focused on managing perceptions and avoiding accountability. The consequences of her actions left Thornton Township in a precarious position, with the community struggling to find direction under a leader who appeared more concerned with defending her image than addressing the real issues at hand. The growing concerns over mismanagement, secrecy, and lack of transparency painted a picture of a leader who was losing touch with the very residents she was meant to serve. The future of Thornton Township remained uncertain as long as Henyard continued to prioritize her personal narrative over the needs of the community. Tiffany Henyard's tenure as mayor of Dalton and supervisor of Thornton Township has quickly become a saga of controversy, legal battles, and political scandals. From accusations of financial misconduct to a leadership style that has alienated colleagues and constituents alike, Henyard's administration has attracted increasing scrutiny. With allegations piling up and residents growing more dissatisfied, Henyard's leadership has come under fire. Insider reports, combined with a mounting wave of criticism from the public, paint a picture of a leader whose actions have left the community frustrated, disillusioned, and questioning her ability to govern effectively. The rift between Henyard and her colleagues became apparent early in her tenure. Dalton trustee Gonzalez, who had initially nominated Henyard for the mayoral position, was one of the first to express disillusionment. He recalled how, from the very beginning, Henyard operated with an air of superiority, treating the council as though she were the sole authority in the room. According to Gonzalez, Henyard's combative interactions with trustees quickly alienated her from those who had once supported her. He remembered her questioning, "What are they going to think now? What are they going to say now?" This marked the first signs of a fractured leadership style that would only escalate as time passed. During her first year in office, Henyard was involved in multiple controversies. Among the most concerning was the hiring of an inspector who was not properly vetted, leading to accusations of neglecting standard procedures. Additionally, there were allegations of misuse of taxpayer funds, with no clear approvals or documentation to justify some of her expenditures. Perhaps most troubling was her decision to use Dalton police officers for personal security, which many believe was an unnecessary expense at a time when the township faced budgetary constraints. These actions raised serious concerns about Henyard's ability to effectively manage the township and safeguard the public's trust. The mounting controversy reached a boiling point during an annual township meeting, where a 23-year-old South Holland resident boldly addressed the leadership. The resident criticized Henyard's administration, arguing that the township's leaders were acting in ways that were contrary to the best interests of the community. You claim that you want us to participate in civic affairs and attend these meetings, but based on my first meeting in Thornton Township, it appears some actions are being taken against the interests of the township's residents, she said. This comment was one of the first in a series of public grievances that would challenge Henyard's leadership. The scrutiny deepened further when resident G.S. Watts voiced concerns over Henyard's handling of a mental health referendum. Watts was critical of Henyard's failure to adequately address community concerns and her dismissal of the referendum, which had been rejected by voters and would have raised taxes in the township. More public voices joined the chorus of critics. Trina Diaz, once a supporter of Henyard, came forward with serious accusations. She claimed that Henyard's leadership was marked by mismanagement, citing instances such as being barred from attending a Dalton board meeting and allegations of misconduct during official trips. Diaz further accused Dalton trustee Andrew Holmes of complicity in some of these questionable actions. Nate Fields, a photographer from South Holland who had worked with Thornton Township, also added his voice to the growing list of grievances. Fields recounted a conversation with Henyard after the death of a prominent community member, where she had promised him support, only to later terminate him without explanation. This was just one more example of what many saw as a pattern of arbitrary decisions and a lack of accountability in Henyard's administration. As the criticisms mounted, Henyard found herself facing legal challenges that mirrored the growing public outcry. Lawsuits piled up, ranging from accusations of wrongful termination to claims of favoritism and unfair practices. Among the most notable legal battles was a lawsuit filed by a Dalton police officer who had been assigned to Henyard's personal security detail. The officer accused Henyard and Dalton Village trustee Andrew Holmes of engaging in misconduct, filing a legal claim that deepened the controversy surrounding Henyard's leadership. The legal troubles only intensified. Dwayne Thrash, a former maintenance manager in Dalton, filed a lawsuit against Henyard, accusing her of conspiring to replace a school board attorney with a law firm of her choosing. When Thrash refused to participate in what he considered a shady scheme, he claimed he was fired while on an approved vacation. Thrash's lawsuit further alleged that Henyard had violated his constitutional rights, demanding compensation for his unlawful termination. These lawsuits became the tip of the iceberg, with further legal actions emerging as former employees, local businesses, and even the public raised concerns over Henyard's conduct. Federal investigators soon joined the fray, with reports surfacing that Henyard was under investigation for using public funds for personal gain. It was revealed that Tiffany had spent a staggering $900,000 in taxpayer dollars over 2 years on travel-related expenses, including first-class airfare and luxurious hotel stays at 5-star properties, such as the Four Seasons in Atlanta and the Marquis in New York City. Allegations of unauthorized expenses continued to surface, with a particular focus on a trip Henyard took to Las Vegas. In response, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot was hired to oversee the investigation into Henyard's lavish spending. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the use of taxpayer money was under intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, further investigations uncovered troubling financial practices involving Henyard's inner circle, including her boyfriend and political allies. Subpoenas were issued, demanding records related to payroll expenses, credit card transactions, and other financial dealings within the administration. Among those named in the subpoenas were Henyard's deputy police chief and several close associates, signaling that the web of alleged corruption extended far beyond the mayor herself. Henyard's top aide, Keith Freeman, also found himself in legal trouble, facing charges of bankruptcy fraud for failing to disclose income he had received from Dalton. Freeman's actions were scrutinized in connection with his work in Robbins, where audits revealed that he had received payments exceeding the village's budgeted amounts. Despite the mounting legal challenges, Henyard continued to deny any wrongdoing. She accused her critics of politically motivated attacks and sought to frame the backlash as racially charged. "You should all feel ashamed of yourselves because you are all black, and you're sitting up there beating and attacking a black woman in a position of authority," Henyard claimed, attempting to cast herself as the victim in a racial and political conspiracy. This defensive stance only served to alienate many of her critics and further tarnish her reputation. As the investigations continued, more damning evidence emerged. It was reported that Henyard had spent over $112,000 in taxpayer-funded travel expenses within just 1 year. Credit card records revealed a consistent pattern of excessive spending on luxury accommodations and first-class flights. These revelations prompted widespread outrage within the community, with many questioning how Henyard could justify such lavish expenditures while the township faced significant financial challenges. The legal and public relations challenges continued to mount. With each passing day, the case against Henyard seemed to grow stronger, and the pressure on her administration reached a boiling point. As more evidence came to light, it became increasingly difficult for Henyard to maintain her position. The federal investigation gained momentum, and speculation grew that even more damning revelations would soon be uncovered. Henyard's closest allies, including Freeman, found themselves embroiled in their own legal troubles, further fueling concerns that the entire administration was mired in corruption. For Tiffany Henyard, the future of her political career seemed uncertain. Despite her continued denials, the mounting evidence against her made it increasingly difficult for her to maintain her position as mayor and supervisor. Residents of Dalton and Thornton Township were demanding accountability, and many were beginning to lose faith in her ability to lead. As investigations continued and legal battles unfolded, it remained to be seen whether Henyard would be held accountable for her actions, or whether her efforts to deflect blame would allow her to weather the storm. In the end, Henyard's tenure as mayor and supervisor may be remembered for the scandals and controversies that have overshadowed her leadership. Whether or not she will be held accountable for her actions remains to be seen, but the consequences of her missteps are already being felt within the community. As legal battles continue and the investigation into her use of public funds intensifies, one thing is certain: Tiffany Henyard's time in office has left an indelible mark on Dalton and Thornton Township, and the fallout from her administration will likely resonate for years to come.